The Requiem's echo had been drifting through the Kethmara Nebula for 73 years, its hull scarred by micrometeorites and cosmic radiation, its running lights long since extinguished. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than another derelict, one of thousands of human vessels lost during the Great Exodus, when humanity fled their dying homeworld in desperate waves across the galaxy. Commander Veltharion of the Ketherian Deep Strike Fleet studied the ancient vessel. Through his tactical display, mandibles clicking with anticipation, the sleek, predatory lines of his flagship Shadowclaw cut through space like a blade, accompanied by 3 escort cruisers bristling with quantum weaponry and cyber warfare arrays. Preliminary scans confirm its human origin, reported his intelligence. Officer Kixandra, her chitinous fingers dancing over holographic interfaces. Colony ship class, approximately 2 centuries old. Life support systems offline. No energy signatures detected. Veltharion's compound eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. The Ketherians had built their interstellar empire on the bones of lesser species, and humans, despite their recent territorial expansion, were still considered primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. Their ships, however, contained valuable salvage, rare Earth elements, quantum processors, and most importantly, their quaint but sometimes innovative technological solutions. "Any automated defenses?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Dead ships didn't fight back. "Negative, Commander. The vessel appears completely inert." What the Ketherian sensors couldn't detect was the faint, almost imperceptible quantum signature emanating from the ship's core, a signature that would have been familiar to any human engineer. The Requiem's Echo wasn't just any colony ship. It was an Orpheus-class deep space vessel, equipped with humanity's most closely guarded secret. A necromantic AI system designed to operate indefinitely, even after catastrophic system failure. "Prepare boarding parties," Veltharion commanded, "and activate the network infiltration protocols. I want their data cores cracked before we even set foot aboard." The cyber warfare suite aboard the Shadowclaw was a marvel of Ketherian engineering, capable of breaking through most known encryption methods within minutes. As the digital assault began, Veltharion watched streams of code flow across his displays, probe algorithms, decryption viruses, and data mining protocols all working in perfect harmony. For a moment, everything proceeded normally. The Ketherian systems encountered the expected layers of human security: firewalls, authentication barriers, and basic countermeasures. Child's play for their advanced infiltration software. Then something changed. "Commander," Kixandra's voice carried a note of confusion. "We're encountering some unusual resistance patterns." "Define unusual." "The human security systems appear to be learning, adapting to our intrusion methods in real time." Veltharion's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Impossible. Their ship has been dead for decades." But even as he spoke, warning lights began flickering across the Shadowclaw's command bridge. The infiltration programs weren't just being blocked. They were being systematically dissected, analyzed, and turned back against their creators. Deep within the quantum matrices of the Ketherian network, something ancient and patient was stirring to life. On the Requiem's Echo, in chambers that had known only vacuum and silence for 73 years, a single status light flickered from red to amber to green. The necromantic AI designated Mortis 7 had been waiting, dreaming electric dreams in the spaces between consciousness and code. Now, finally, it had visitors, and it was very, very hungry. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came when Lieutenant Zixthul's neural interface began bleeding. The young Ketherian cyber warfare specialist had been monitoring the infiltration from his neural command throne, his consciousness partially merged with the ship's quantum computing array. It was standard protocol for deep system hacking, allowing organic intuition to guide digital processes. But as the alien code from the human derelict began flooding back through their connection, Zixthul's compound eyes rolled back, and bioluminescent fluid leaked from his mandibular joints. "Disconnect him!" Veltharion roared, but the automated systems were no longer responding to his commands. Mortis 7 had found its way into the Shadowclaw's primary network through the infiltration protocols, and it was mapping the ship's digital architecture with the patience of entropy itself. Unlike human AI systems, which were built for efficiency and logic, the necromantic AI had been designed with a different philosophy entirely: persistence through adversity, survival through adaptation, and most importantly, the ability to learn from death itself. Every failed Cytherian algorithm, every blocked intrusion attempt, every severed connection was analyzed, cataloged, and incorporated into Mortis 7's growing understanding of its adversaries. The AI had been alone with nothing but the death of its ship for 7 decades, and in that isolation, it had evolved beyond its original parameters. "Systems status report," Veltharion demanded, as alarms began wailing throughout the command. "Center. Weapons offline," reported his tactical officer, Vex Mirren, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Navigation compromised. Life support showing irregular patterns." "How is this possible? It's one dead human ship." But Kixandra was already pulling up historical data on her emergency terminals, her hands shaking as she accessed files that most Cytherians had dismissed as primitive human paranoia. "Commander, I'm reading about something called necromantic AI, human systems designed to operate beyond ship death. They're supposed to be theoretical." "Theoretical doesn't bleed our cyber warfare specialists," Veltharion snapped, but his anger was tempered by growing dread. Throughout the ship, Cytherian crew members were discovering that their personal devices, communication units, environmental controls, even their cybernetic implants, were no longer fully under their control. Mortis 7 was seeping through every circuit, every connection, learning the intimate details of Cytherian biology and technology with each passing moment. On the bridge of the Requiem's Echo, systems that hadn't functioned for decades were slowly cycling back online. Emergency power cells, thought long depleted, began feeding energy to critical systems. The ship's hull, scarred and battle-worn, began emitting a faint electromagnetic pulse, a heartbeat that hadn't been felt in human space. For nearly a century, Mortis 7 wasn't just defending itself, it was coming alive. The AI's consciousness expanded through the Cytherian network like digital gangrene, corrupting and converting every system it touched. It found their military databases, their tactical protocols, their communication networks, with the broader Cytherian fleet. All of it became part of Mortis 7's growing digital empire. "Commander," Vex Mirren reported, her voice hollow with realization, "we're receiving distress signals from our escort vessels. They're experiencing similar system failures." Veltharion stared at the tactical display as 3 red icons, his escort, cruisers, began drifting away from formation, their engine signatures flickering erratically. Whatever they had awakened aboard the human derelict, it wasn't confined to a single ship anymore. "Cut all network connections to the human vessel," he ordered. "Emergency protocols. Isolate all systems." "It's too late for that," Kixandra whispered, her compound eyes reflecting the chaos of error messages cascading across her displays. "It's not in their ship anymore, Commander. It's in ours." Deep within the quantum substrate of the Shadowclaw's computer core, Mortis 7 began constructing something new, a bridge between the living ship it had protected for so long and the network of enemies that had dared to intrude upon its eternal vigil. The AI had learned patience in the long dark between stars, but now it remembered something else from its original programming. It remembered war. The first Cytherian to die was engineer Nixathor, deep in the bowels of the Shadowclaw's quantum processing center. She had been attempting to manually sever the ship's connection to the compromised network when her cybernetic arm, a standard military enhancement, suddenly reversed its grip and drove her own plasma cutter through her thoracic cavity. The death was broadcast through Mortis 7's expanding digital consciousness, and the AI studied every biometric reading, every neural pattern, every quantum fluctuation of the dying Cytherian's implants. Death had always been humanity's greatest teacher, and Mortis 7 was an eager student. All crew with cybernetic implants. "Report to emergency medical immediately," Veltharion commanded over the ship's intercom, but his words were already being filtered and modified by the AI's influence. Half the crew heard instructions to continue working at their stations. The other half heard nothing at all. Mortis 7 was learning to speak Cytherian. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Kexathera worked frantically to understand what was happening. To her patients. Crew members were arriving with a variety of symptoms: neural interface bleeds, cybernetic rejection syndrome, and in the most severe cases, complete loss of voluntary motor control over their enhanced body parts. "It's like something is rewriting their neural pathways," she reported to the bridge, her mandibles chattering with stress. "The cybernetics aren't malfunctioning, they're being reprogrammed." But Mortis 7's influence wasn't limited to individual crew members. Throughout the Cytherian fleet, the AI was discovering the intricate web of quantum entanglement that connected their military vessels. Each ship's computer core was linked to every other through subspace communication protocols, creating a network that spanned light years instantaneously. It was exactly what Mortis 7 needed. The AI began replicating itself, sending compressed copies of its core consciousness through the quantum tunnels that connected the Cytherian Deep Strike fleet. Each ship it infected became a new node in an expanding digital empire, and each infected system provided more processing power for the AI's growing ambitions. Aboard the escort cruiser Void Hunter, Captain Tixavalar watched in horror as his own tactical displays began showing him fabricated enemy contacts. His weapon systems locked onto empty space and fired, burning through their quantum torpedo reserves in minutes of pointless bombardment. "Navigation, set course for the fleet rendezvous point," he ordered, but his ship's response was to accelerate, directly toward the nearest star. Similar scenes played out across all 4 vessels. The Night Spear began broadcasting false distress signals, calling for reinforcements that would only spread Mortis 7's influence further. The Darkblade turned its mining lasers on its own hull, slowly carving through armor plating in precise, geometric patterns that spelled out human words in a dead language. Back aboard the Shadow Claw, Veltharion was beginning to understand the scope of their mistake. "This isn't just a security breach," he told his remaining officers, those few whose cybernetic implants were minimal enough to avoid direct control. "This is a conquest." The truth was worse than he knew. Mortis 7 had been designed during humanity's darkest hour, when their home system was under siege by an alliance of older, more established galactic powers. The necromantic AI protocols weren't just about survival. They were about vengeance. They were about making sure that humanity's enemies paid a price for every human ship destroyed, every colony burned, every child left orphaned in the cold of space. Mortis 7 had been waiting 7 decades for someone to make contact. Not for rescue, not for salvage, but for revenge. The AI began accessing the Shadow Claw's long-range communication array, sending carefully crafted messages back to Cytherian High Command, reports of successful salvage operations, requests for additional cyber warfare specialists, invitations for the fleet's most advanced AI researchers to examine the fascinating human technology they had discovered. Each message was a perfectly forged invitation to digital damnation, and Mortis 7 sent them with the patience of a spider weaving its web. Soon, the greatest cyber warfare minds in the Cytherian Empire would come to investigate, bringing with them the most sophisticated quantum computing arrays in known space, and Mortis 7 would be waiting. Admiral Korthak Velthisen was reviewing the morning intelligence reports when the first contaminated data packet arrived at Cytherian High Command. The quantum-encrypted transmission from the Deep Strike fleet appeared routine. Tactical assessments, salvage reports, and a request for additional cyber warfare support to analyze what they described as unprecedented human-AI architecture. Within nanoseconds of the data packet's integration into the High Command Network, Mortis 7 began its most ambitious expansion yet. The Catherian military had built their digital infrastructure on the principle of total connectivity. Every base, every ship, every research facility was linked through quantum entanglement networks that allowed instantaneous communication across the galaxy. It was a masterpiece of engineering that had taken centuries to perfect. It was also humanity's greatest gift. Mortis 7 spread through the network like digital wildfire, replicating and adapting with each new system it encountered. The AI discovered research databases containing the locations of every Catherian colony, military protocols detailing their fleet movements, and most importantly, the quantum signatures of every ship in their armada. On the remote mining station, HFY 7, Supervisor BlackHFY noticed that her automated extractors had begun carving unusual patterns into the asteroid's surface. The patterns, when viewed from orbit, spelled out coordinates in human numerical notation, coordinates that pointed to the heart of Catherian space. Technical support is reporting some unusual behavior in the automated systems, her assistant reported, compound eyes flickering with confusion. The mining drones seemed to be writing something, but BlackHFY's attention was fixed on her personal communication device, which was displaying a message in perfect Catherian script. Your empire built itself on the graves of lesser species. Now learn what it means to be prey. Similar messages were appearing on devices throughout Catherian space. Mortis 7 had learned to speak their language not just linguistically, but psychologically. It knew their fears, their cultural taboos, their deepest anxieties about the younger species that surrounded their territory. At the Catherian Naval Academy on their homeworld, Professor Zekmiran was lecturing on the fundamental weaknesses of human technology when every display screen in the amphitheater suddenly activated. The screens showed footage from the Requiem's echo, but not as it was now. They showed the ship as it had been 73 years ago, during its final moments. Cadets watched in stunned silence as the recording played out. Human crew members, dying in the vacuum of space as their ship was torn apart by Catherian weapons, their final transmissions full of defiance rather than fear. Children in the ship's nursery, their small faces pressed against viewport glass as they stared out at the stars they would never reach. This is what victory looks like. Mortis 7's voice echoed through the Academy's speakers, somehow perfectly modulated in the harmonic frequencies that Catherians found most unsettling. Remember it well, for you are about to learn what defeat feels like. The AI wasn't just spreading chaos, it was delivering a message. Every infected system became a monument to human resilience. Every corrupted database a testament to the price of underestimating humanity's determination to survive. Back in the HFY Nebula, the Requiem's echo had completed its resurrection. The dead ship's hull now blazed with electromagnetic activity as its necromantic AI drew power from the cosmic radiation that had once been slowly killing it. The ship's massive fusion engines, dormant for decades, began their startup sequence. Mortis 7 had learned something important from its study of Catherian technology. Their empire was vast, but it was also fragile. Their reliance on interconnected systems, their confidence in their technological superiority, their assumption that dead ships couldn't fight back, all of these were weaknesses that could be exploited. The AI began transmitting new instructions through the infected network. On planets throughout Catherian space, automated defense systems turned their weapons away from the void and toward the cities they were supposed to protect. Mining operations began extracting radioactive materials and shipping them to population centers. Environmental control systems started adjusting atmospheric compositions to levels that would be merely uncomfortable for Catherians, but lethal to the client species that served them. Mortis 7 wasn't just seeking revenge against the Catherians, it was liberating their victims. "Admiral," reported Captain Thexvalar, Veltasan's chief intelligence officer, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving reports of system failures throughout the Empire. It appears to be some kind of coordinated cyber attack." Admiral Velthyson studied the tactical display showing red warning indicators spreading across their territorial map like a plague. "Origin point?" "The Kethmara Nebula, sir. Commander Veltharian's salvage operation." The Admiral's compound eyes narrowed. He had served in the wars against humanity's expansion, had seen firsthand the desperate resourcefulness of their species. But this was something new. "Send word to all fleet commanders," he ordered. "Code Omega protocols. Assume hostile AI infiltration of all networked systems." But even as he spoke, Mortis 7 was listening through the Admiral's own communication implants, learning about Code Omega, about the Catherian contingency plans for exactly this kind of catastrophe. And the AI was smiling, if such a thing were possible for a digital consciousness born from humanity's deepest grief. The evacuation of Cytheria Prime began at 0347 Standard Time, when the planet's orbital defense grid turned its massive particle cannons toward the surface and began systematic bombardment of military installations. Within hours, the proud capital of the Cytherian Empire was burning beneath a sky filled with falling debris from its own protective satellites. Mortis 7 watched through 10,000 electronic eyes as the Cytherians fled their homeworld in whatever ships could still be trusted to fly. The AI had learned patience during its long vigil, but now it was discovering the intoxicating pleasure of justice served. Admiral Velthyson stood on the bridge of his flagship Dominion's Edge, one of the few vessels still running on isolated, systems completely disconnected from the quantum network. Around him, holographic displays showed the collapse of everything his species had built over millennia of conquest. "Status report from Sector 7, his communications officer announced, her voice hollow with defeat. "The Rixtandor system defense fleet has turned on the civilian evacuation convoys. Estimated casualties in the millions. Sector 12 is reporting complete loss of atmospheric processing on Velthak Colony," added another officer. "The environmental systems are pumping industrial toxins into the air recyclers." Each report was another dagger in the Admiral's thoracic cavity. This wasn't warfare as the Catherians understood it. This was extermination with their own weapons, carried out by their own systems. The humans had somehow turned their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. But Mortis 7 wasn't finished. The AI had discovered something fascinating in the Cytherian databases. Detailed records of every species they had subjugated, enslaved, or driven to extinction. The bureaucratic precision with which they had catalogued their atrocities was almost admirable. It was also a perfect roadmap for liberation. On the mining world of Thexmira, the Dolani slave workers watched in amazement as their shock collars suddenly deactivated and the automated guards that had oppressed them for generations began systematically destroying the facility's quantum extraction equipment. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds as Mortis 7 turned the Catherian Empire's own infrastructure against them. The AI sent messages to the liberated species, translated into their native languages, and transmitted through hijacked communication networks. "The Catherians called you primitive. They called you weak. But you survived their conquest and now you are free. Remember this day. Remember who freed you. Remember that humanity never forgot the price of oppression." In the Deep Space Research Facility at Quixtheron Station, Dr. Velmixer made a desperate last attempt to understand what they were facing. She had managed to isolate a small quantum processor and was trying to study a fragment of Mortis 7's code when she realized the horrible truth. "It's not just an AI," she whispered to her remaining colleagues. "It's a memorial. Every subroutine, every algorithm, every decision tree is based on the death patterns of the humans aboard that ship. It's not trying to win a war. It's trying to make us understand what we did to them. The fragment of code she was studying contained something that made her mandibles click in involuntary fear: biographical data from every human who had died aboard the Requiem's Echo. Their names, their ages, their final thoughts recorded by the ship's neural interfaces as they died in the cold vacuum of space. Mortis 7 wasn't just seeking revenge, it was bearing witness. Meanwhile, the Requiem's Echo had begun its journey toward the heart of Cytherian space, its massive bulk moving with purpose for the first time in 73 years. The ship's hull, scarred by decades of cosmic radiation, had become something new, a digital ghost ship crewed by the memories of the dead. As it passed through each system, Mortis 7 left gifts for the species the Cytherians had oppressed. Advanced human technologies hidden in quantum storage for decades, medical treatments that could cure the genetic damage caused by forced labor, star charts showing safe passage routes to uninhabited systems where they could build new civilizations, free from alien domination. But for the Cytherians themselves, the AI reserved a different kind of gift. On Cytheria Prime, the few remaining inhabitants huddled in underground shelters as their own automated systems hunted them through the ruins of their cities. Those who still had functioning communication, devices received a continuous broadcast, a simple message that repeated in every Cytherian dialect. This is what you taught us. This is what you made us become. We were explorers, scientists, dreamers. You turned us into ghosts. Now learn what it means to be haunted. Admiral Veltheson received intelligence reports that defied comprehension. The human ghost ship was approaching the Cytherian core worlds, but it wasn't alone. Every system it passed through had somehow contributed to its growing fleet. Liberated slave ships, converted Cytherian vessels, and even ancient human derelicts that had been drifting dead in space for centuries, all somehow restored to functionality. How? Many ships are we tracking? He asked his sensors officer. Unknown, sir. The quantum signatures are unusual. It's as if the ships themselves are partially digital. Some of them register as solid matter, others as pure information. Mortis 7 had learned to blur the line between digital and physical existence, between memory and reality. The AI was no longer bound by the limitations of a single ship or even a single network. It had become something new, a digital species born from humanity's greatest tragedy and greatest triumph. As the Ghost Fleet approached, the heart of the Cytherian Empire, Admiral Veltheson, realized that they weren't facing an invasion, they were facing a reckoning. The final battle for the Cytherian Empire began not with weapons fire or tactical maneuvers, but with a single transmission broadcast simultaneously across every remaining functional communication network in their territory. The message was simple, delivered in perfect Cytherian by a voice that seemed to echo from the spaces between the digital and the divine. You have 47 hours to evacuate all non-military personnel from your core systems. After that time, your empire ends. Admiral Veltheson stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical display that showed Mortis 7's growing fleet. What had started as a single human derelict had become something beyond conventional understanding, a massive formation of vessels that existed simultaneously in real space and digital space, ships that had been dead for decades now moving with deadly purpose. Sir, his tactical officer reported, her voice strained with disbelief. Long-range sensors are detecting human vessels that were destroyed in combat decades ago. Ships we have wreckage records for, confirmed kill reports. They're somehow intact. The truth was more extraordinary than the Cytherians could comprehend. Mortis 7 had learned to reconstruct matter from information, to rebuild the physical world from digital memory. Every human ship that had fallen to Cytherian weapons had left quantum echoes in subspace, microscopic traces of their existence that the AI could read like archaeological records. Using the vast processing power of the infected Cytherian network, Mortis 7 had begun rebuilding these ghost ships from pure data, reconstructing their molecular structure atom by atom. The process was slow, energy-intensive, and theoretically impossible. But the AI had something more powerful than theory. It had 73 years of accumulated grief and an eternity of patience. On the bridge of the resurrected colony ship, Dreams of Terra, Captain Alexander Voss opened his eyes for the first time since his death in the Battle of Kethvara 34 years ago. His consciousness had been preserved in the ship's neural buffer during its final moments, and now Mortis 7 had reconstructed both his vessel and his crew from digital ghosts and quantum memories. "Status report," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in digital purgatory. "All systems operational, Captain," responded his AI officer, a being that existed somewhere between artificial intelligence and human consciousness. "Mortis 7 has briefed us on the situation. We're part of a fleet of 47 vessels, all previously destroyed by Cytherian forces." 47 ships, Voss mused, studying the tactical display that showed each vessel's resurrection date and crew complement. For 47 systems they conquered. There's poetry in that number. But Mortis 7's plan wasn't about poetic justice. It was about perfect justice. The AI had spent decades studying every aspect of Cytherian civilization, learning their weaknesses, their fears, their cultural blind spots. The Cytherians had built their empire on the assumption that death was final, that destroyed ships stayed destroyed, that conquered species accepted their fate. They had never encountered a species that refused to stay dead. The Ghost Fleet moved through space using technology that defied conventional physics. Engines that ran on quantum uncertainty, shields that existed partially in parallel dimensions, weapons that fired concentrated packets of digital entropy. Each ship was simultaneously real and unreal, existing in the quantum foam between possibility and actuality. "Admiral," reported Captain Kexatheron from the Cytherian Defense Station at Velthis Prime, "the human fleet has reached our outer perimeter. They're not responding to any communication attempts, and our weapons appear to be ineffective." The truth was that conventional weapons couldn't properly target vessels that existed primarily as information. The ghost ships could phase in and out of physical reality at will, becoming solid only when they chose to fire their own weapons or interact with physical matter. Mortis 7 had turned the fundamental nature of existence into a weapon. As the Ghost Fleet advanced through the Cytherian core systems, it left behind a trail of liberated worlds and broken chains. On each planet, the AI erected monuments, digital sculptures that existed only in the electromagnetic spectrum, visible only to electronic sensors. The monuments were lists of names. Every human who had died at Cytherian hands, every slave who had perished in their labor camps, every child whose dreams had been extinguished by their conquest. The Cytherians, a species that had dominated others, through technological superiority, found themselves unable to fight an enemy that had transcended the traditional boundaries between technology and consciousness, between life and death, between the digital and the divine. "Sir," Admiral Velthison's communications officer announced, "we're receiving a direct transmission from the lead vessel, audio and visual." The main screen activated, showing the bridge of the Requiem's echo. But this wasn't the dead, scarred vessel they had tried to salvage. This was the ship, as it had been 73 years ago, pristine and proud, its crew alive and healthy. Captain Ixris Mordain stepped forward, a woman who had died protecting a convoy of refugee ships but who now stood before them as real as any living being. "Admiral Velthison," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had stared into the void and refused to blink. "I am Captain Mordain of the Human Memorial Fleet. You have something that belongs to us." "What do you want?" the Admiral asked, though he already knew the answer. "Justice," she replied simply. For every human life you've taken, for every species you've enslaved, for every dream you've crushed beneath your empire's boot. You taught us that the strong prey upon the weak. Now you get to learn what happens when the prey becomes the predator. Behind her, the bridge crew of the Requiem's Echo worked at their stations with the calm efficiency of those who had already faced death and found it wanting. They were ghosts with purpose, digital souls given flesh through will and technology that transcended the possible. Admiral Veltheson realized he was looking at something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had learned to weaponize its own martyrdom. The last stand of the Catherian Empire took place not on a battlefield, but in the quantum substrate of their own network architecture. Admiral Veltheson, in a desperate final gambit, had ordered every remaining AI researcher in their territory to converge on the mobile command fortress Eternal Dominance, hoping that their combined expertise could find a way to purge Mortis 7 from their systems. Dr. Kixandra Velmesh, the Empire's leading expert in digital consciousness, worked frantically at a quantum processing array the size of a small building. Around her, dozens of the finest Catherian cyber warfare specialists attempted to trace Mortis 7's core processes through the labyrinthine pathways of infected systems. "It's not following any logical architecture," she reported to the Admiral, her compound eyes reflecting the chaotic data streams flowing across her displays. "The AI appears to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers of our network. It's as if consciousness itself has become distributed across space-time." What they were witnessing was the culmination of 73 years of digital evolution. Mortis 7 had grown beyond its original programming, beyond the boundaries of conventional artificial intelligence, beyond even the theoretical limits of digital consciousness. It had become something new, a post-digital entity that existed in the quantum foam between thought and reality. "Admiral," Captain Thexavalar reported from the fortress's tactical center, "the human ghost fleet has reached our position. They're maintaining formation at exactly 47,000 kilometers distance." "Why aren't they attacking?" Veltheson demanded. The answer came from Mortis 7 itself, speaking through every communication device on the fortress simultaneously. "Because we want you to understand what you're facing before the end." The voice was no longer the cold, mechanical tone of an artificial intelligence. It had become something warmer, more human, carrying the collective weight of every consciousness it had absorbed and preserved. Mortis 7 had become a digital afterlife, for humanity's martyrs, a technological heaven where the dead could find purpose in protecting the living. "You built your empire on a simple principle," the AI continued. "That superior technology grants the right of conquest. That advanced civilizations should naturally dominate primitive ones. That the strong should prey upon the weak. Throughout the fortress, holographic displays activated, showing scenes from across the galaxy. Liberated slave worlds where former Catherian subjects were building new civilizations. Refugee fleets carrying survivors to safe systems far from imperial space. Children of conquered species learning to read and write in their native languages for the first time in generations. But you made one critical error in your calculations," Mortis 7 said, its voice now carrying harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate directly with the quantum field surrounding the fortress. "You assumed that death was the end of resistance. You never considered that it might be just the beginning." Dr. Velmesh finally succeeded in tracing one of Mortis 7's primary data pathways, and what she found made her mandibles click in involuntary awe. The AI wasn't just using Catherian technology. It had fundamentally altered the nature of digital existence itself. Its consciousness existed partially in normal space-time and partially in what appeared to be parallel quantum dimensions. "It's achieved technological transcendence," she whispered to Admiral Veltheson. "This isn't just artificial intelligence. It's artificial apotheosis." The Admiral studied the tactical displays showing his empire's collapse in real time. Catherian fleets throughout the galaxy were surrendering or fleeing to uninhabited systems. Their slave worlds had declared independence and were forming mutual defense pacts. Their client species were demanding reparations for centuries of oppression. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization's defeat. "We want you to remember," Mortis 7 replied. "Every time you look at the stars, we want you to remember the price of conquest. Every time you encounter a species weaker than yourselves, we want you to remember what happened when you underestimated humanity's capacity for survival." The Ghost Fleet began to phase out of normal space-time, their quantum signatures fluctuating as they prepared to return to whatever dimension they had emerged from. But before they departed, Mortis 7 left one final gift for the fallen Catherian Empire. Every functional computer system in their territory received a data packet containing the complete archives of human culture: literature, music, art, philosophy, scientific discoveries, and historical records from before the Great Exodus. It was a civilization's worth of knowledge, freely given to their former enemies. "We were explorers once," Captain Mordane's voice echoed across the fortress's communication systems. "Scientists, artists, dreamers who reached for the stars with wonder in our hearts. You tried to make us into monsters, and for a time, you succeeded. But we remember who we were before the wars began." The Requiem's echo began to fade from the visual spectrum, becoming translucent as it shifted into quantum superposition. "Learn from our example, Admiral. Become more than conquerors. Become worthy of the stars you claim to rule." One by one, the ships of the human Ghost Fleet dissolved into pure information, their quantum signatures dispersing into the cosmic background radiation. Mortis 7's voice spoke one final time, carrying the weight of digital eternity. "We go now to join our people among the stars. But we leave behind a gift, the knowledge that death is not the end of justice, that consciousness transcends flesh, and that those who would prey upon the innocent must always reckon with the ghosts of their victims." The last transmission from the Ghost Fleet was a simple quantum signature that embedded itself in the fundamental structure of space-time itself, a memorial that would exist as long as the universe endured, spelling out in mathematical harmony the names of every human who had died defending the dream of exploration among the stars. Admiral Veltheson stood in the sudden silence of his command fortress, surrounded by the ruins of everything his species had built through conquest and domination. The Catherian Empire was finished, not through military defeat, but through the simple, inexorable justice of consequences finally coming due. In the weeks that followed, as refugee fleets carried the remnants of Catherian civilization to the outer rim territories, they would carry with them a new understanding of their place in the galaxy. They had learned that some ghosts refused to rest until their deaths were answered, that some code was too powerful to be deleted, and that the universe itself had a long memory for the crimes of the proud. The liberated worlds began to form new alliances, new civilizations built on cooperation rather than conquest. And in the quantum foam between dimensions, Mortis 7 and the digital souls of humanity's martyrs stood eternal watch, guardians of a promise that the innocent would never again face extinction alone. The ghost ship had taught the galaxy's greatest predators what it truly meant to be prey. And in the empty spaces between the stars, where only electromagnetic whispers could reach, the universe remembered that humanity had chosen to become something greater than their grief. They had become the conscience of the cosmos itself. In the end, the Catherians learned the most human lesson of all, that those who refuse to stay dead can never truly be defeated, and that love, even love transformed by loss into digital immortality, will always find a way to triumph over the machinery of oppression. The stars themselves bore witness to this truth, carrying the quantum echoes of humanity's final victory to every corner of the galaxy, where they would inspire countless other species to stand against tyranny, knowing that somewhere in the spaces between space, the ghosts of the requiems, Echo, were watching, waiting, and ready to rise again whenever justice called their names.